In the heart of the African savannah, during a season so dry it drained life from the land itself, a dominant male lion faced something his strength could not defeat. His mate, a pregnant lioness, was trapped in a cold steel snare left behind by humans. As death drew closer with every shallow breath, a lone ranger stepped into the scene and knelt before one of the most dangerous predators on Earth. In that moment, with no rescue coming and no second chances, he placed his life on a single choice. And from that choice, the fate of a man and a lion became bound in a way no one could have imagined. The land had not seen rain in months. Across the southern edge of the reserve, the earth lay cracked and pale, as if the ground itself had grown tired of waiting. Grass that once swayed shoulder-high now scraped the soil in brittle strands, and waterholes that used to reflect the sky had shrunk into shallow, muddy scars. In seasons like this, life did not end suddenly. It thinned, it weakened, it waited. At the center of this dry expanse moved a lone male lion. He walked with the steady, deliberate pace of a ruler who understood his territory down to every stone and thorn. His mane, darkened by dust and age, framed a face marked with old scars, memories of battles fought and survived. This land was his. Every acacia tree, every ridge of rock, every stretch of wind-worn grass belonged to him by right of strength and endurance. But today his attention was not on rivals or borders. A few paces behind him walked a lioness. Her movements were slower than usual, her breathing heavier. With each step her belly swayed low, full with life not yet born. She had given birth before, but this season was different. The drought had taken its toll. Prey was scarce, energy was precious, and the time to find safety was running out. The male slowed, matching her pace. He glanced back often, his tail flicking low, not in irritation, but in awareness. In the wild, there were no guarantees, no safety nets, no emergency rescue teams waiting just beyond the horizon. Survival depended on judgment, timing, and sometimes on choices that could not be undone. The wind shifted. With it came a scent that did not belong, metal. The lion lifted his head, nostrils flaring. The smell was faint, masked by dust and dry grass, but it was there, sharp, cold, wrong. It carried no life, no warmth. It was the smell of something that did not bleed and did not hunt, yet still killed. The lioness stepped ahead of him, drawn toward a cluster of dense shrubs where shade promised brief relief from the sun. The male followed, uneasy, his muscles tightening beneath his coat. Then the world broke. A sound tore through the stillness, a sharp, panicked cry cut short by pain. The lioness vanished into the brush, and in the next heartbeat, the male was there, crashing through branches and thorns. He found her on the ground. Her back leg was caught in a steel snare, the wire pulled so tight it had bitten deep into flesh. Blood darkened the dust beneath her. She struggled instinctively, and the snare answered by tightening further. Each movement made it worse. Each breath came faster, shorter. The lion roared. It was a sound that rolled across the plain, deep and furious, a warning meant for any living thing that might hear it. Birds burst from nearby trees. Somewhere in the distance, smaller predators paused, uncertain. The lion lunged toward the snare, snapping at the wire, pawing at it with raw force. The metal did not yield. It only cut deeper. He tried again, harder, his claws striking sparks against steel. The lioness cried out, her body shuddering. The male froze. For the first time in many seasons, strength had failed him. The snare did not care that he was king of this land. It did not fear his teeth or his roar. It waited, patient and unfeeling, designed by hands that would never stand close enough to suffer the consequences. The lion stepped back, chest heaving. He circled her, searching for an answer that did not exist in instinct or memory. He had fought rivals larger than himself. He had defended kills against entire hyena clans. He had survived droughts, fires, and injuries that would have ended weaker animals. But this was different. This was not a battle. It was a trap. The lioness's breathing changed. Shorter now, shallow. Her body trembled, not from fear, but from exhaustion. Life inside her shifted, responding to stress it was never meant to know. The male pressed his forehead gently against hers, a rare gesture of calm. He stayed there, unmoving, as if holding her could somehow steady the world. Time passed. The sun crept lower, heat pressing down with no mercy. The smell of blood carried farther now, drifting on the wind like a signal flare. Somewhere beyond the ridge, scavengers would notice. They always did. And somewhere else, unseen by the lions, a human vehicle rolled slowly along the perimeter road of the reserve. Ethan Cole had been a ranger here for 11 years. He knew this stretch of land the way some men knew city streets. He knew where animals crossed, where poachers hid, where the radio signal faded without warning. His job was not glamorous. Most days were spent tracking footprints, cutting old snares, filing reports that rarely made headlines. Wildlife conservation, he had learned, was not about dramatic rescues. It was about persistence, about prevention, about stopping disasters before they happened. That afternoon, his radio crackled with static before going silent altogether. Ethan frowned, tapping the unit against his palm. No signal. Again. He slowed the vehicle, scanning the ground ahead. That was when he saw the marks. Dragged soil, broken branches, a dark stain against pale earth. He stopped. The heat hit him as soon as he stepped out of the vehicle. The smell reached him next, blood unmistakable and fresh. His hand went instinctively to his belt, then hesitated. Whatever was ahead, rushing in blind, would only make things worse. Ethan moved forward on foot, slow and cautious. He did not see the lion at first. He heard him, a low, vibrating sound, not quite a growl, not quite a roar. A warning held in check. Ethan stopped. 10 meters ahead, partially hidden by brush, stood the male lion, broad-shouldered, scarred, watching. Between them, on the ground, lay the lioness, pregnant, caught. Ethan's chest tightened. He had seen snares before, too many times. He knew what they did. He also knew what standing this close to a defensive male lion meant. No insurance policy, no health coverage, no emergency medical bills plan could prepare a man for this moment. There would be no second chances here. The lion stared at him, unblinking. Ethan slowly removed the rifle from his shoulder and set it on the ground. The decision came before fear could argue with it. If he turned back now, the lioness would die. Her cubs would die, and the snare would claim another silent victory, unrecorded, unpaid for, unpunished. He took one step forward. The dry season watched, holding its breath. The lion did not attack. He stood his ground, broad chest rising and falling, every muscle coiled beneath his skin. His amber eyes never left the man who had stepped into his world. This was not fear. It was calculation. A predator deciding whether a single movement would mean survival or irreversible loss. Ethan felt it immediately. The silence between them was heavy, deliberate, and alive. The lioness shifted weakly on the ground. The wire tightened with her movement, and a low, broken sound escaped her throat. It was not a roar. It was pain, stripped of pride. Blood seeped into the dust, dark and slow, carrying a scent that traveled farther with every second. The male lion turned back to her, then to the snare. He lunged again. Steel rang sharply as his teeth clamped down on the wire. Sparks jumped. The sound was wrong. Too clean, too cold. He pulled with raw strength, forelegs braced, claws carving lines into the earth. The snare held. The lioness cried out, her body convulsing. Instantly, the male released the wire and stepped back, shaken by the sound he had caused. He circled her, tail lashing now, confusion creeping into movements that were usually precise. He nudged her shoulder gently, urging her to stand, to run, to do what lions had always done. She could not. Her breathing grew erratic, shallow, fast. Her sides trembled, and the life inside her responded, shifting in distress. This was no longer just an injury. It was a race against time. Ethan watched, frozen by a conflict no training manual could fully prepare him for. He had learned about wildlife management, about ethical conservation practices, about the long-term economic impact of illegal poaching on protected ecosystems. He had sat through seminars funded by environmental protection grants and international conservation programs. But none of that mattered now. None of the language of policy or funding or high-level conservation strategy applied to what lay bleeding in front of him. This was raw reality. The male lion lowered his massive head and pressed it against the lioness's neck. He stayed there, unmoving, as if his weight alone could anchor her to life. The sound that came from him then was quieter, a low vibration that seemed to come from deep within his chest. Not a warning, not a threat, a plea. Ethan swallowed hard. He had seen death before. Rangers saw it often. Animals lost to drought, to disease, to human cruelty that came and went without consequence. But there was something unbearable about witnessing strength rendered useless, about watching a creature built for dominance stand powerless before a thin strand of wire. He shifted his weight slightly. The lion's head snapped up. One step closer, and the distance between them closed to something dangerous. Ethan could feel his pulse in his ears. He raised his hands slowly, palms open, making himself smaller. Years in the field had taught him one rule above all others: never surprise an animal that has everything to lose. The lion did not move forward. He did not retreat either. The standoff stretched. Seconds turned elastic, pulling tight. The sun beat down, unforgiving. Ethan's shirt clung to his back with sweat, his throat dry. His mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. His radio was dead. His vehicle was too far to matter now. No emergency medical evacuation, no wildlife rescue helicopter, no rapid response unit funded by some distant conservation budget was coming. There would be no insurance claim for this moment, no liability coverage, no legal safety net. What happened next would belong only to the choices made here. The lioness groaned again. This time the sound ended in a sharp gasp. Her body stiffened, then sagged. Something changed in the male lion. The hesitation vanished. He stepped away from Ethan and positioned himself squarely between the man and the lioness, legs planted wide, head lowered. His mane lifted slightly in the breeze, framing a face carved with resolve. This was the posture of a creature ready to die for what lay behind him. Ethan understood the message clearly. You will not touch her. Not like this. Ethan took a slow breath and lowered himself to one knee. Then another. The movement was deliberate, controlled. He reached up and removed his hat, setting it on the ground beside the rifle he had already abandoned. The gesture was small, almost meaningless by human standards. But in the language of the wild, it mattered. The lion watched closely. Ethan spoke softly, not because he believed the lion understood words, but because tone carried weight. I'm not here to take anything, he said. I'm here because that thing, he nodded toward the snare, doesn't belong. The lion did not respond, but he did not attack. Ethan leaned forward just enough to see the full damage. The wire had cut deep into muscle, swelling already visible around it. Infection would follow quickly if she survived this long enough for it to matter. And beneath it all, the unmistakable signs of labor had begun. Subtle contractions rippling through the lioness's flank. Too early, too fast. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. He had dismantled hundreds of snares in his career. He knew their design, their cruelty, their efficiency. He also knew that cutting one while standing within striking distance of a protective male lion was something no training course had ever prepared him for. A distant sound carried across the plain, a high, broken laugh. Hyenas. Ethan's eyes flicked toward the horizon. Dark shapes moved along a ridge far off, pacing, watching. They would not rush in. Not yet. Hyenas were patient. They waited for weakness, for collapse. The lion heard them too. His ears twitched, his body tightening again. He glanced toward the sound, then back to Ethan, then to the lioness. He was being pulled in 3 directions at once. Protect, defend, decide. The wire glinted in the sun. Ethan reached slowly for the cutters at his belt. The lion took a step forward, a deep growl rolling from his chest, low and final. Ethan stopped instantly. He froze, hands suspended in the air, breath shallow. He did not look away. He did not reach further. He waited. The lion stared at him for a long moment. Dust drifted between them, hanging in the light. The lioness shifted again, weaker now, her strength bleeding into the ground beneath her. Finally the lion stepped aside. Not far, just enough. The message was unmistakable. One chance. Ethan nodded. Once. He moved. Ethan felt the weight of the moment settle into his bones the instant the lion stepped aside. It was not trust, not mercy. It was permission measured in heartbeats. The male lion remained close, close enough that Ethan could see the fine dust clinging to the scars along his muzzle, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. Every instinct in Ethan screamed that this was the distance at which men died. One wrong movement, one sound too sharp, 1 second too slow. He lowered himself fully to the ground. Kneeling was not enough. He sank until one knee pressed into the cracked earth, then both. His movements were careful, economical, the way he had learned when working around injured animals whose fear could turn lethal without warning. His hands stayed visible, his breathing slowed, deliberately controlled. The lion watched him without blinking. Behind them, the lioness shuddered. A tremor rippled through her flank, stronger than before, and she released a sound that cut through the air like torn fabric. It was followed by another contraction, then another, each closer together. Ethan recognized the pattern immediately. Labor. Too soon. Too fast. His jaw tightened. This was no longer a matter of freeing her leg alone. Even if the snare came off, even if she could stand, her body was already committing to something it might not survive. Ethan glanced toward the horizon again. The hyenas had moved closer, still far enough to watch, not yet close enough to challenge. Their silhouettes drifted in loose formation, heads low, ears forward. They were counting breaths now, measuring weakness the way they always did. In places like this, predators didn't need to rush. Time worked in their favor. Ethan shifted his focus back to the wire. The snare was old but well made, thick steel cable twisted tight, anchored to something buried beneath the soil. Cutting it in one place would not be enough. It would recoil violently, and if it snapped back against the lioness's injured leg, it could tear what little strength she had left. He reached slowly for his cutters again. The lion growled, not loud, but deep enough that Ethan felt it in his chest. "I know," Ethan murmured, his voice barely more than air. "I know." He stopped. He waited. Seconds passed. The lion did not advance. His tail flicked once, then stilled. Ethan resumed, slower this time. He worked methodically, angling the cutters to relieve tension a fraction at a time. Each small movement made the wire creak, a sound that seemed to scrape against the lion's nerves. The male shifted his weight repeatedly, stepping closer, then back, his patience thinning with every metallic whisper. Ethan kept his eyes down. Direct eye contact now would be a challenge, not reassurance. He focused on the task, letting the world narrow to wire, dust, blood, and breath. His hands were steady despite the sweat running into his eyes. He thought briefly of how strange it was that this moment, this raw intersection of life and death, would never appear in any annual report or conservation funding proposal. No one would attach a price tag to this risk. No grant application would describe a kneeling ranger cutting a snare while a lion decided whether to kill him. The language of environmental protection, of wildlife preservation budgets, and sustainable land management felt distant and hollow here. This was not theory. This was consequence. The lioness cried out again, her body arching against the ground. The wire tightened reflexively, biting deeper. Ethan swore under his breath and adjusted his grip, easing the tension just enough to keep the cable from sawing further into muscle. "Easy," he whispered, though he knew she could not understand. "Just breathe." The lion's head snapped toward him. Ethan froze. The male lion stepped forward, teeth bared now, breath hot and sharp. He was less than a body length away. Ethan could see the faint scars around his eyes, the lines carved by years of survival. This was a creature that had learned exactly how fragile life was and how quickly it could be taken. Ethan lowered his head. If this was the end, he would not make it worse by panicking. The lion hovered there, every muscle taut, then turned his head toward the lioness as another contraction seized her. The sound she made this time was quieter, weaker, but it carried something else with it. Fear, not of death, of loss. The lion stepped back. Ethan exhaled slowly, not realizing until then how tightly he had been holding his breath. He continued cutting. Minutes stretched. The sun edged lower, heat pressing down without mercy. Ethan's arms began to ache from holding position, his fingers stiffening as blood dried against his skin. He worked in silence now, no words, no reassurance, only movement. The wire finally loosened enough that he could slide part of it free. The lioness sagged with relief, her breathing hitching, her head dropping to the ground. The male lion moved instantly to her side, nudging her, checking her, standing over her with a presence that blocked the world. Ethan shifted his weight, trying to see past him. The lion allowed it, just barely. That was when Ethan saw it. The ground beneath the lioness was wet, not just with blood, but with fluid, the unmistakable sign that the birth was coming, whether anyone was ready or not. The cubs were coming now, snare or no snare, danger or no danger. Ethan's heart sank. He had planned for one impossible task. Now, there were two. He looked around quickly, assessing what little he had. No medical kit, no gloves, no clean water nearby. Only a small canteen, a lighter, a coil of rope, and the fading light of day. And beyond it all, the hyenas were closer. Their laughter carried clearly now, rising and falling in uneven bursts. They had smelled the change. They knew something was about to happen. The male lion lifted his head and roared. It was not the roar of a challenge. It was the roar of a warning. The sound rolled across the land, deep and powerful, a declaration that this ground was not yet claimed. The hyenas paused, uncertain, reassessing. They would not leave, but they would wait. Ethan finished cutting the final strand of wire. The snare fell away with a dull thud. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the lioness released a long, shuddering breath. Her body relaxed slightly, tension easing just enough to tell Ethan that one battle had ended, even as another began. Ethan leaned back on his heels, exhaustion washing over him. The lion turned his head and looked at him, not with threat, not with gratitude, with something far older and harder to name. Ethan met his gaze just briefly. "I'm not leaving," he said quietly. "Not yet." The dry season listened, and the night began to move closer. The light began to change. It was subtle at first, the sun lowering just enough to soften the harsh edges of the land. Shadows stretched longer across the cracked soil, and the heat lost its sharpness, settling into something heavier, more ominous. Evening in the reserve was never quiet for long. It was a time when the balance shifted, when the hunters who waited took their first cautious steps forward. Ethan felt it in his chest before he saw it. The male lion moved again, slow and deliberate, placing himself between Ethan and the lioness. His massive frame cast a long shadow over her trembling body. He did not bare his teeth. He did not growl. He simply stood there, immovable, his presence an unspoken line that could not be crossed. Ethan stayed where he was. The snare lay discarded in the dust, harmless now, but its damage remained. The lioness's breathing was uneven, her sides rising and falling in shallow bursts. Another contraction rippled through her, stronger this time, and she released a low sound that vibrated through the ground beneath them. The cubs were coming. Ethan understood the danger instantly. Birth in the wild was always risky, even under ideal conditions. Here, with blood on the ground and predators circling, it was almost unthinkable. There would be no sterile room, no trained staff, no emergency medical care waiting behind clean walls. There was no ambulance, no wildlife hospital, no safety net of insurance coverage or emergency services to fall back on. Out here, life depended on instinct and timing alone. The male lion lowered his head toward the lioness, touching his nose to her shoulder. His tail flicked once, sharply, as another sound carried across the plain. Laughter, closer now. The hyenas were no longer content to wait at the horizon. Dark shapes slipped between the rocks, moving with the loose confidence of animals that believed time was on their side. They spread out, careful to keep their distance from the lion, but close enough to remind everyone present that weakness had been noticed. Ethan's pulse quickened. He reached for the lighter in his pocket, fingers closing around it with relief. Fire was not a solution, but it was a language predators understood. It spoke of danger, of unpredictability. It bought time. Slowly, carefully, he gathered dry grass and broken twigs, keeping his movements measured and visible. The lion watched him, every motion tracked, every breath weighed. When Ethan struck the lighter, the small flame flared briefly, fragile against the vastness of the land. The hyenas hesitated. Ethan fed the flame, coaxing it into a small, steady fire. Smoke rose thin and gray, curling into the cooling air. It was not much, but it was enough. The hyenas shifted again, pacing, frustrated. They would not rush in, not yet. The lion turned his attention back to Ethan. Their eyes met. For a long moment, neither moved. There was no fear in the lion's gaze now, no immediate threat, only calculation layered with something deeper, something that did not belong solely to instinct. Ethan felt it settle between them, heavy and real, a shared awareness that the next hours would decide more than survival. Ethan lowered himself back to the ground, keeping a respectful distance. He did not reach for the lioness. He did not move closer. He simply stayed. Another contraction seized the lioness. Her body tightened, muscles trembling with effort and pain. Ethan clenched his hands, helpless. He had assisted in wildlife births before, under controlled conditions, with teams and equipment. This was different. This was exposure stripped bare. The male lion stepped aside just enough for Ethan to see her again. It was not permission to touch. It was acknowledgement. Ethan nodded once, barely perceptible. He poured a small amount of water from his canteen onto the ground near her head, not touching her, just offering what little relief he could. The lion allowed it. His ears flicked, but he did not intervene. Time stretched. The sky deepened from pale gold to muted orange. The fire crackled softly, a thin barrier against the darkness pressing in. The hyenas continued to circle, their eyes catching the light, their patience unwavering. Ethan's legs began to ache from holding position. Sweat cooled on his skin as the temperature dropped. He welcomed the discomfort. It meant he was still alive. It meant he was still here. The lioness cried out again, louder this time, her body arching with effort. Ethan felt his chest tighten as he saw movement beneath her belly. Life pushing forward, demanding space in a world that offered none willingly. The male lion let out a low, rumbling sound, not a roar, not a warning, something closer to encouragement. He pressed his head against her side, grounding her, anchoring her through the pain. Ethan had never seen anything like it. This was not dominance. This was devotion. The realization struck him with unexpected force. For all the policies written about wildlife protection, for all the financial investments poured into conservation programs and environmental security initiatives, moments like this existed far beyond spreadsheets and funding cycles. They existed without witnesses, without recognition, without any promise of return. And yet, they mattered. Another sound broke through the night air. Footsteps, human footsteps. Ethan's head snapped up, heart racing. He scanned the darkness beyond the fire, his mind racing through possibilities. Poachers? Another ranger? Trouble in any form could tip the balance now. But the sound faded, swallowed by distance. Whatever it was, it moved away. The lion did not react. He remained focused on the lioness, unwavering. Ethan exhaled slowly, tension easing just enough to breathe again. The night settled fully now, stars beginning to pierce the darkening sky. The fire burned low, but steady. The hyenas waited, frustrated but undeterred. The land itself seemed to lean inward, listening. The lioness's breathing changed again, slower between contractions, deeper during them. Her strength was draining, but she did not give up. Neither did the lion at her side. Ethan stayed silent. He did not speak promises he could not keep. He did not make plans beyond the next breath. He simply remained, present, alert, committed. In that shared stillness, something passed between man and lion. Not trust, not friendship, understanding, a promise without words. And as the first stars fully claimed the sky, the dry season bore witness to something rare, a moment where survival depended not on teeth or tools alone, but on restraint, patience, and the choice to stay when leaving would have been easier. The night was far from over, but for now no one moved. The first cry came out wrong. It was thin, uneven, barely louder than the wind moving through dead grass. For a moment, Ethan thought it was another sound of pain from the lioness. Then he saw the movement, small, fragile, trembling against the dust-darkened ground. A cub, barely visible beneath the lioness's body, slick with fluid and blood, its tiny chest shuddered once, then stilled. The world seemed to pause. The male lion froze, his massive frame suddenly rigid. He lowered his head slowly, carefully, as if afraid that even breathing too hard might shatter what lay before him. His eyes never left the newborn. Ethan's heart slammed against his ribs. He had seen births in the wild before, but never like this. Never under threat. Never with so much already lost before the beginning. The cub did not move again. Its small body lay pressed into the cooling earth, silent and frighteningly still. The hyenas sensed it instantly. Their laughter rose sharper now, closer, no longer cautious. Shapes slipped forward, emboldened by the scent of blood and birth. This was the moment they waited for. The pause between struggle and strength. The thin gap where life hesitated. Ethan acted without thinking. He stood, grabbed a burning branch from the fire, and swung it outward, shouting for the first time since sunset. The sound tore through the night, raw and desperate. Flames flared as he drove the hyenas back, smoke stinging his eyes, heat licking his skin. The male lion roared, not in challenge, but in warning. The sound rolled across the land, deep and absolute, carrying with it the promise of violence if the line was crossed. The hyenas skidded to a halt, uncertain again, frustration twisting their movements. They did not flee. They simply waited farther back, circling once more. Ethan dropped back to the ground, chest heaving. The lioness shuddered. Another contraction seized her, stronger than the last. Her body tightened, muscles trembling with effort that bordered on collapse. She released a sound that was neither cry nor growl, something torn from deep inside. The male lion pressed his head against her flank, grounding her, steadying her through the pain. He nudged the cub gently with his nose. Nothing. Ethan's throat tightened. He knew better than to interfere, but every instinct he had as a human screamed to do something. Anything. In the absence of hospitals, emergency medical services, or even the most basic form of wildlife care, this moment came down to seconds and chance. No insurance policy, no conservation funding, no legal framework could change that. Then suddenly, the cub moved. A small twitch, then another. Its mouth opened, drawing in a thin, shaky breath. A sound followed, weak but alive. Ethan felt his knees nearly give out. The male lion inhaled sharply, his body shuddering as if struck by something unseen. He lowered his head and began to lick the cub, slow and deliberate, each movement careful, reverent. The cub responded instinctively, squirming weakly, its tiny limbs flexing against the earth. Life had chosen to stay. But the danger was not over. The lioness cried out again, her body convulsing. Ethan realized with a sinking certainty that this was not the end of the birth. There was more movement beneath her belly, another life pressing forward. The hyenas shifted closer. Ethan fed the fire quickly, his hands moving fast now, urgency overtaking caution. Flames leapt higher, casting long shadows across the ground. The smoke thickened, stinging his lungs, but he welcomed the discomfort. It meant the fire was still holding the line. The male lion glanced toward the circling predators, then back to the lioness, torn between threats that demanded opposite responses. His ears flattened briefly, frustration rippling through his posture. Another contraction. The second cub emerged faster, smaller than the first, its movements frantic and uncoordinated. It let out a sharp cry almost immediately, a sound stronger than the first had managed. The lioness collapsed back against the ground, exhausted, her breathing ragged but steady. Ethan stayed perfectly still. He did not move closer. He did not interfere. He understood now that his role was not to act, but to remain, to hold the space long enough for nature to finish what it had begun. Minutes passed. The fire crackled. The hyenas paced. The stars burned bright overhead, indifferent witnesses to everything below. The lioness lay still, sides rising and falling slowly now. The worst of the storm passed. The male lion inspected both cubs, sniffing them carefully, touching them with surprising gentleness. His body trembled, not with aggression, but with something that looked dangerously close to relief. Ethan felt it too. The tension that had gripped his chest for hours loosened, just enough to breathe again. His arms shook with delayed exhaustion, his muscles aching from strain and adrenaline. He sank back slightly, resting his weight on his heels, careful not to shift too suddenly. The hyenas remained. They always did. But something had changed. They were no longer testing the edges of the circle. They were watching, calculating anew. 2 cubs meant more mouths to feed, but it also meant 2 fiercely defended reasons for the lion to kill. The male lion lifted his head and met Ethan's gaze across the firelight. For the first time, there was no warning in his eyes, no threat, only awareness. Ethan nodded slowly, not in victory, not in pride, but in acknowledgment of what they had both endured. He did not smile. He did not speak. Words would have cheapened the moment. The lioness shifted, pulling the cubs closer to her body. They pressed against her instinctively, seeking warmth, seeking safety. Her breathing steadied further, exhaustion overtaking pain. The night settled again, not quiet, never quiet, but balanced. Ethan stayed where he was, eyes open, fire burning low but steady, knowing that dawn was still hours away and that survival, like everything else in this land, was never guaranteed beyond the present moment. Still, as he watched the small, fragile shapes pressed against their mother, he understood something clearly. Against all logic, against all odds, life had found a way through steel, blood, and hunger. And under the watching eyes of a lion, a ranger, and the waiting dark, the impossible had already begun. The fire burned lower, settling into a steady bed of embers that glowed like quiet eyes in the dark. Ethan fed it sparingly, careful not to let the flames rise too high. Too much light would carry too far, too little, and the hyenas would test the edge again. Out here, balance mattered more than force. He had learned that lesson the hard way over the years, through injuries that never made reports, through nights spent calculating risk the way other people calculated monthly bills or insurance premiums. The lioness lay still now, her breathing deep and slow, exhaustion pulling her toward sleep. The cubs pressed close to her belly, their small bodies rising and falling in uneven rhythm. Every so often one of them twitched or released a thin, uncertain sound, then settled again. The male lion did not rest. He stood with his body angled between the fire and his family, head high, ears constantly adjusting to the sounds of the night. When the hyenas shifted, he shifted. When the wind carried a new scent, his muscles tightened almost imperceptibly. This was not vigilance born of panic. It was discipline. Ethan understood it well. He sat back on his heels, then slowly shifted his weight to ease the ache in his knees. The movement sent a dull pain through his side where a thorn had torn skin earlier, unnoticed in the chaos. He pressed a hand there briefly, feeling the warmth of blood already drying. It was minor. Out here, minor injuries were simply part of the job, unwritten clauses in a contract no one ever signed. The hyenas drifted closer again, emboldened by time. They did not rush. They never did. They circled wide, testing angles, reading posture. One of them laughed, a sharp, broken sound that echoed against the rocks. Another answered. The male lion turned slowly, fixing them with a stare that held no uncertainty. He took one step forward. Not a charge, not a threat, a reminder. The hyenas stopped. Ethan felt the tension ripple outward, like a held breath shared by everything living within reach of that moment. He added a small branch to the fire, coaxing a brief flare, then let it settle again. Hours passed. The sky deepened to a thick, endless black, scattered with stars so bright they felt close enough to touch. The land cooled, the day's heat bleeding away into the open air. Ethan welcomed the chill. It kept him alert. It reminded him that dawn would come eventually, whether anyone survived to see it or not. At some point, fatigue crept in, heavy and insistent. His eyes burned, his shoulders sagged. He caught himself blinking too long, head dipping forward, and forced himself upright again. Sleep was a luxury no one could afford tonight. The male lion glanced back at him. Not for long, just long enough. Ethan straightened instinctively. The look was not a warning, it was not approval. It was recognition of shared watchfulness, of a night carried together. Ethan felt it settle into his chest with unexpected weight. He thought briefly of the world beyond this darkness, of paved roads and warm kitchens, of people worrying about mortgage payments, legal advice, retirement planning, things that felt almost unreal now. Out here, the math was simpler. You either stayed awake or you didn't. You either held the line or something crossed it. The lioness stirred. One of the cubs struggled clumsily, pushing its head beneath her belly. The lioness shifted, accommodating without fully waking. The male lion lowered his head and sniffed the cub, then resumed his watch. The hyenas waited. They always did. Ethan checked the horizon again. No headlights, no radio signal crackling to life, no rescue team dispatched by protocols and procedures written far away. He had known when he knelt earlier that evening that this night would be his responsibility alone. There would be no compensation for risk taken, no liability coverage if things went wrong. He had accepted that without thinking. Still, the weight of it pressed in during the long hours. A sound broke through the quiet, different from laughter, different from wind. Footsteps. Ethan tensed instantly, hand drifting toward the ground where his rifle lay, unused. The sound came again, faint but deliberate. Human. The male lion stiffened, mane bristling slightly, his body angling toward the noise. His reaction was immediate, instinctive. This threat was different. This one had built the trap. Ethan strained to see into the darkness. The sound paused, then retreated. Whoever it was, poacher, patrol, ghost of a presence, it moved away, swallowed again by distance. Ethan released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The male lion relaxed by degrees, but he did not forget. Neither did Ethan. The night dragged on, slow and unyielding. The fire shrank. The hyenas paced, frustration growing with each passing hour. They had expected weakness, collapse, death. Instead, they found endurance. Just before dawn, the male lion finally lowered himself to the ground, still upright, still alert. He did not sleep. He simply rested his weight, conserving strength for what came next. Ethan felt the shift in the air before he saw it. The sky lightened at the edge of the world, a thin gray line cutting through black. Birds stirred. The hyenas drifted farther back, interest fading as daylight threatened to expose them. The lioness opened her eyes. She lifted her head weakly, then stronger, scanning her surroundings. The cubs clung to her, mewling softly. She nudged them, instinct sharp again now that pain had loosened its grip. The male lion rose smoothly, stepping closer to her side. He touched noses with her briefly, a gesture so intimate Ethan looked away without meaning to. The moment passed. The male lion turned back to Ethan. For a long second, neither moved. Then the lion stepped aside. Not as before. Not a warning or a test. Simply space. Ethan understood. He gathered his things slowly, careful not to startle anyone. He did not approach the cubs. He did not reach for the lioness. He respected the distance that had been earned, not given. He backed away step by step, eyes low, movements steady. The male lion watched him go. When Ethan reached the edge of the clearing, he stopped and looked back once. The family was already turning inward, reconnecting, reclaiming the quiet rhythm of survival. The night that had bound them was ending. Ethan turned and walked toward the rising light, his body aching, his mind heavy with what he would carry from this place. Behind him, the land resumed its ancient patterns, indifferent and exacting. None of them had slept, all of them had survived. A year changed the land, but it did not soften it. The rains came late and left early, never enough to erase the memory of hunger. Grass returned in patches, uneven and fragile, and the herds moved cautiously, always one bad week, away from collapse. The reserve learned to breathe again, but it never forgot how close it had come to silence. Ethan Cole kept moving. He did what rangers always did when the world refused to slow down. He adapted. His days were filled with patrols, reports, long drives over unforgiving terrain. He cut down snares when he found them, documented carcasses when he was too late, and tracked human footprints far more often than animal ones. Illegal hunting had not stopped. It never did. It simply changed shape, growing quieter, more patient, more dangerous. The memory of that night never left him. Sometimes it came back in dreams, the glow of embers, The weight of the lion's gaze, the thin cry of a newborn cub fighting its way into the world. Other times it returned in waking moments, uninvited, when the wind carried a certain scent, or when dusk stretched shadows too long across the ground. He never went back to that exact place, not out of fear, out of respect. Some moments did not belong to memory alone. They belonged to the land that shaped them. On a late afternoon patrol, Ethan followed fresh tracks along the western boundary, where rocky hills folded into narrow ravines. This area had always been a problem. Too many blind spots, too many places for men with wire and rifles to disappear. His radio crackled weakly, then cut out again. He sighed softly. "Of course," he muttered. He marked the last known signal point on his GPS device, a habit learned through experience and more than one uncomfortable debrief with supervisors concerned about safety protocols and liability exposure. Out here, losing communication meant more than paperwork. It meant isolation. The tracks were human. Boot prints, fresh, deliberate. Ethan followed them carefully, moving slower now, senses sharp. He could smell cigarette smoke faintly, mixed with oil and dust. Poachers, not amateurs, the kind who worked in teams, who knew patrol schedules, who calculated risk the way other men calculated investment returns or long-term financial planning. The sun dipped lower. Ethan rounded a bend in the ravine and saw them. 3 men. They froze when they saw him. The moment stretched thin, brittle. Ethan raised his hand slightly, palms visible, keeping his voice calm. "This is a protected area," he said evenly. "Put the weapons down. We can talk." They did not. One of them bolted. Another raised his rifle. The third hesitated just long enough for chaos to decide. The shot cracked through the ravine, deafening in the enclosed space. Rock exploded inches from Ethan's head. He dove to the side as another shot rang out, pain searing through his leg as he landed hard. The men scattered. Ethan forced himself upright, adrenaline drowning out everything else. He moved after them, favoring his injured leg, heart pounding. He could hear them crashing through brush, slipping on loose stone. He followed instinctively, training overriding pain. Then the ground disappeared. The ravine dropped away beneath his feet, hidden by shadow and scrub. Ethan fell hard, the impact knocking the breath from his lungs. Pain ripped through his side, sharp and immediate. He rolled once, twice, then stopped against a rock wall. For a long moment he couldn't move. The sky above him burned orange and red, the last light draining fast. His leg screamed with pain, his ribs protesting every breath. He reached for his radio out of reflex, then remembered. Dead. He checked his phone. No signal. The ravine smelled different down here. Damp earth. Old blood. Bones bleached pale by time. This was not a place meant for men to wait. Ethan dragged himself upright and leaned against the rock, breathing hard. He tried to stand fully and nearly blacked out. The pain in his leg was worse now, deep and wrong. Something was broken. He laughed once, bitter and breathless. "So this is how it goes," he whispered. The sound came before he saw them. Laughter, high, sharp, too close. Hyenas emerged from the shadows one by one, their eyes catching the fading light. 6 of them, maybe more. They spread out naturally, effortlessly, cutting off escape routes without needing to think about it. Ethan felt a cold clarity settle over him. He had seen this formation before. A year ago, the circle had been drawn around a lioness bleeding into the dust. He had stood outside it, trying to keep death at bay with fire and patience. Now he was inside it. He grabbed a loose branch from the ground and pulled himself upright, forcing his injured leg to bear weight it didn't want. The hyenas watched, curious rather than threatened. This was familiar territory for them. Weakness spoke louder than weapons. The largest hyena stepped forward, teeth bared in a grin that was all promise and no humor. Ethan raised the branch and shouted, his voice echoing uselessly off stone. The hyenas flinched, then laughed again, closer now, tighter in their circle. The sun slipped below the horizon. Darkness rushed in. Ethan's thoughts scattered briefly, images of paperwork unfinished, of colleagues who would notice his absence too late, of risk assessments and safety briefings that never mentioned how quiet it felt when the end drew near. No emergency response plan covered this. No insurance clause. No appeal. His grip on the branch tightened. Then the laughter stopped. The hyenas froze, heads snapping toward the ravine entrance. A sound rolled through the darkness, low, resonant, unmistakable. A roar. Ethan's heart stuttered. The ground vibrated as something large moved through the shadows. The hyenas backed away instinctively, unease rippling through them. Another roar followed, closer now, layered with a second presence. 2. No. More. A massive shape emerged into the fading light, mane dark and familiar, eyes burning with the same steady intensity Ethan remembered. Behind him moved a lioness, and at her flanks 2 younger lions, taller now, stronger, their movements confident and unafraid. The circle broke. The hyenas scattered, snapping and retreating, but the lions did not chase blindly. They advanced together, controlled, purposeful. One young lion feinted left, cutting off escape, while the lioness lunged, forcing the pack to split. The male lion struck once. It was enough. The hyenas fled into the darkness, their laughter gone, replaced by the sound of retreat. Silence rushed back in. Ethan slid down against the rock, breath shaking. He looked up as the male lion approached, massive head lowering slightly as if to see him more clearly. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. A year ago, Ethan had knelt in the dust, bleeding and afraid, choosing to stay when leaving would have been safer. Now the roles had reversed. The lion stood watch. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, emotion pressing hard against his chest. "I guess," he murmured hoarsely, "we're even." The lion did not move. He stayed. The lions did not leave. They stood at the mouth of the ravine, silhouettes carved against the fading night, their bodies forming a quiet barrier between Ethan and everything that had wanted him dead only moments before. The male lion took the highest ground, positioning himself where he could see both approaches at once. The lioness stayed closer to Ethan, her head low, ears alert. The 2 younger lions paced once, then settled, flanking their parents with an ease that spoke of lessons already learned. Ethan leaned back against the rock, breath shallow, pain blooming in steady waves through his leg and ribs. Shock crept in at the edges of his thoughts, dulling sensation, softening sound. He pressed his palm into the dirt to stay anchored, to remind himself that this was real. The male lion glanced down at him, not as prey, not as a threat, as something that belonged, if only briefly, within the circle of protection. Ethan swallowed hard. His throat felt thick, tight with more than pain. "You didn't have to," he whispered, the words meant for no one and everyone at once. "You really didn't." The lion did not move. Time stretched again, but differently now. The frantic edge was gone. The land seemed to exhale, releasing tension it had been holding since the first hyena laugh echoed through the ravine. Above them, stars burned steadily, indifferent to fear and gratitude alike. Minutes passed, then more. Ethan's vision blurred slightly as the adrenaline faded. He knew he couldn't stay conscious much longer. His injuries needed attention, real attention. Broken bones didn't care about courage or karma. He fumbled for his radio again out of habit, thumb brushing useless plastic, then let his hand fall. Somewhere far off, an engine sound carried faintly through the night. At first, Ethan thought he imagined it. Then the lions reacted. The male lion lifted his head, ears forward. The lioness turned, muscles tightening. The younger lion stood, scanning the darkness. The sound came again, clearer now, a vehicle moving slowly, cautiously, bouncing over rough ground. Relief hit Ethan so hard it made his chest ache. "Hey," he croaked, forcing his voice louder. "Over here." The sound barely carried, but it didn't need to. Headlights crested the ridge above the ravine, beams cutting through the darkness. The vehicle stopped abruptly. Voices followed, sharp, urgent, human. "Ethan!" He let his head fall back against the rock, a breathless laugh escaping him. "Yeah," he muttered, "that figures." The rescue team approached carefully, weapons low but ready, eyes widening as they took in the scene below. No training seminar, no emergency medical response protocol, no legal safety briefing had prepared them for this. 4 lions standing guard over an injured ranger as if it were the most natural arrangement in the world. Ethan lifted a hand weakly. "Easy," he said. They're with me." The team hesitated, then slowly advanced, guided by the male lion's posture more than any human command. When they reached Ethan, the medic knelt, hands already assessing damage, movements quick and practiced. "You're lucky," she murmured, cutting away fabric, checking vitals. "Another hour out here and—" She didn't finish the sentence. Ethan didn't need her to. As the stretcher was prepared, the male lion stepped forward once, placing himself directly between Ethan and the vehicle. The lioness mirrored the movement, closer now, her eyes fixed on the humans. Ethan felt the tension spike again. He raised his hand slowly. "It's okay," he said hoarsely. "They're taking me to get fixed up. Emergency medical care, that's the deal." The words sounded absurd in the open air, stripped of context and comfort. But he spoke them anyway, the same way he had spoken a year ago, kneeling in the dust, offering reassurance without certainty. The male lion studied him for a long moment. Then he stepped back. Just enough. Ethan was lifted onto the stretcher, pain flaring as his body shifted. He bit down on a groan, eyes locked on the lions as they carried him upward. The team moved slowly, deliberately, respecting a boundary no one needed explained. At the top of the ravine, the stretcher was secured. The medic adjusted an IV line, murmuring about transport time, about notifying the base, about paperwork and incident reports and follow-up procedures. Words like insurance claims, medical coverage, and legal documentation floated past Ethan, oddly distant, like fragments from another life. He turned his head. The lions were still there, all 4 of them. The male lion stood tall, mane catching the light, his presence unshakable. The lioness pressed close to him, the younger lions at their sides, a family complete. Ethan felt tears slide down his temples, soaking into dust and cloth. He didn't bother to hide them. "A year ago," he said softly, voice breaking despite his effort, "I stayed because it was the right thing to do. I never expected." He trailed off. The male lion held his gaze. In that look was no sentimentality, no human interpretation of gratitude. There was something cleaner, older, a recognition that a debt had been balanced, that the land had remembered what men often forgot. The engine started. The vehicle pulled away slowly, carefully, until the ravine slipped behind them and the lions became shapes again, then shadows, then nothing at all. Ethan watched until his vision blurred completely. When he woke later, under harsh white lights, with machines humming quietly beside him, the world felt unreal. Doctors spoke of fractures, of recovery time, of rehabilitation plans that included physical therapy and long-term care considerations. Someone mentioned insurance approvals, another mentioned time off. Someone else talked about retirement planning and how close things could have come to ending very differently. Ethan listened politely, but his mind was elsewhere. Days later, when he was strong enough to stand at a window again, he looked out at a strip of land visible in the distance beyond the facility grounds. He knew the lions would be there somewhere, moving, hunting, raising their young, belonging wholly to a world that asked for nothing but respect. They would not visit, they would not follow. And they should not. Some stories were not meant to continue. They were meant to complete themselves. Ethan closed his eyes and smiled just once, quietly, carrying with him the certainty that the wild had its own memory, and that sometimes, when everything else failed, that memory answered back.